welcome to the UC Business School MBA and Executive Education Masterclass series, where we get to talk to thought leaders in business and academia. Today it is my absolute pleasure to be talking to Roger Gray, CEO of Port of Auckland. Roger, it is absolutely fantastic having you here today.
Oh, thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
I've known you for a few years now, and one of the ones that perhaps a lot of people are not aware of is actually just the length of your background, but also I think your origins in terms of 20 years in the Australian Defence Force. So as a starting point, is it possible to get you sort of talking about, I guess, where things started from for you before your corporate career?
Yeah, very happy to. You can certainly pick up the twang in the language. So I'm trying to get rid of it a bit because New Zealanders are not always so happy to have Australians as their boss, but we live with that. I have become a citizen, so that's the important bit of New Zealand. So I did have a dream as a child to be a soldier. That's all I wanted to do. And unlike most people, I actually went and did my dream. I joined the Australian Army at 17, straight out of school. Went to the Royal Military College, Duntroon, and trained for 4 years to become an officer in the Australian Army. And I then subsequently served for 20 years in the Army in logistics and supply chain, which has then become the thread through my career from there on. I was lucky enough, or privileged enough, to see active service in Cambodia for a year during that, running the logistics for an ANZAC unit, so 500 Australians and 50 Kiwis, and we provided communications to the whole force. So yeah, my career started basically as a soldier, and I probably, if Timor had happened 6 months earlier, I probably would have kept serving, gone on to Afghanistan and Iraq, and ended up doing 40 years in the Army. I loved the job, but a peacetime Army is a certain thing, and sometimes you'd think, well, I wonder if I can cut it outside, so I went into a corporate career.
And from there, I know, for those that don't know your CV, there's always been, a concentration on that area of logistics. So that has always been, I guess, your intention to carry that area of expertise forward? I think it's been this transferable skill that I took out of the military that then has set me in a career that's moved through a number of different sectors, and we can talk about that. But the really important thing that I did when I left the Army was actually to do an MBA. Not at UC. I forgive you for that.
Only because I was at the time living in Australia and hadn't even contemplated coming to live in New Zealand. And so I went to Melbourne Business School and did an MBA, and I found the MBA was a transformative skill set it gave me. It allowed me to bridge a career from the public sector and public life into the corporate world, and that was really important for me. So that's why I'm such a big supporter of MBAs. I think they're really fantastic degrees. So I did do my MBA at Melbourne, and then subsequently I secured a job working in the logistics program at the Sydney Olympics, where I ran the Games Logistics Centre and worked out how to resupply all the venues across Sydney and the rest of Australia. We were given an interesting challenge. We had 6 hours between midnight and 6 a.m. to resupply all the venues. And because the games organisers and what they called the look team didn't want any dirty delivery trucks and things turning up when we had sportsmen and sportswomen and spectators. So and that was a wonderful job, a great bridging job, because the thing that really got me going there was having a shared purpose and vision, and having a deliverable that couldn't slip. So we had to have everything ready for the opening ceremony, and it wasn't negotiable. And what it did was really allowed me to bring my military discipline and logistics skills into a corporate-facing role. And that was a really fantastic job. From there, I met some people at Goodman Fielder who were a sponsor, and I joined Goodman Fielder, and I worked my way up through Goodman Fielder to become supply chain director of one of the Australian baking division, and that was again a logistics job, delivering 6 million loaves of bread from 34 bakeries across Australia. I was enjoying that job and having some interactions with our New Zealand division, and one day my boss said, we need a new MD of Quality Bakers New Zealand, and I got my hand up first, and I subsequently got the job. Pretty unusual for a supply chain person to become an MD, but it was a great opportunity, and I moved my family to New Zealand. and started working in Auckland. And it was interesting, I was driving in on the very first day I was there, and I saw sheep in Cornwall Park, and I went, this place is cool, having a working farm in the middle of the city. So, and then I subsequently did 4.5 years at Goodies, running QB, which was Nature's Fresh, Vogel's, Molenberg, Irvine's Pies, Ernest Adams Cakes, a whole lot of brands, sadly, that have dropped off the portfolio now. But yeah, so that was another great opportunity, and that was my entree card to New Zealand.
And from there on to New Zealand?
I went back to Australia for a short time.
You did? Okay.
For 20 months, and I actually had a very... I went into private equity at Blue Star Printing, which is interesting, another New Zealand contact, because Blue Star came out of the government printing office when Hart and Watson privatised it. So I had this strange recurrence of New Zealand touching into my life, and what that taught me in a private equity piece is you need to have a passion for your product. I became the MD of a printing business, and I just couldn't get excited about pallets of departure cards. Now, some people do, and they love the ink on the paper. And what it taught me was, if you're going to go into a job, make sure you actually like the product. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we got sold 9 months into the role, and then I was unemployed for 11 months. And that was a very sobering time for me personally. And what it did was it's given me a very strong people focus, because I lost my way, lost my confidence, and really got quite challenged by that. And so I now help people who are unemployed. Anybody can come and see me, and I introduce them to people, because I know it was through a friend and a contact that I got the job at Air New Zealand. And it was great to come back, and I went in to run Air New Zealand's supply chain, so you can see how that theme comes through. Yep. And that was procurement, logistics, property, new aircraft program, onboard fulfillment. It was a wonderful job. Three great years doing that. And then Air New Zealand under Christopher Luxon had a very strong talent management program. And so they moved us around, and I got the privilege of leading the airports team, which was 55 airport operations globally, from Hokitika to Chicago, from San Francisco to Perth and Singapore and Bali and all these other fantastic places, and a great team of 2,800 people. I also got to run the lounges, which is always a pretty cool thing when you get to run 25 Air New Zealand airport lounges, and our car parking business. So a really big team, about a quarter of the airline at the time, and it was a wonderful opportunity, a really good people leadership role, and a very heavily unionised workforce, which has then really helped me understand how to work in partnership with unions. From there, as all people's careers sometimes, you don't get what you aspire to. I wanted to join the exec of Air New Zealand, and I didn't get a job. Carrie Haranganui got appointed to the role that I wanted. She'd been a peer of mine. And so I subsequently left and secured the role of CEO of the Port of Lyttelton, and that was my first touch with Canterbury, and loved living here and helping you join the business school advisory board, and subsequently really got into the lifestyle of Canterbury. But 2 years into that role, I got a tap on the shoulder and said, "Are you interested in the biggest turnaround, one of the highest profile turnarounds that New Zealand's got going on, which is to basically fix the Port of Auckland?" And it was too tempting an opportunity, so we sold our lovely house. I dragged my wife back to Auckland, and subsequently that's where I've been for the last 18 months.
One of the ones, and I said this at the start of this video, met you a few years ago, and as you say, coincided with your time at Lyttelton Port Company. One of the ones from the first time I met you and was really struck by is the value and importance you place on people, and as an extension of that, working with people, developing people to really develop high-performing teams. Yep. Can I get you to talk perhaps a little bit about that? Because I think, as I say, it's one of those ones that's really impressed me about how you're able to bring the best out in people and the teams you try to build.
Yeah, I think it goes back to my Army days. And the thing that the Army did in my whole career is every year during that career, you were sent on a development course, be it residential, and it might be in tactics, or it might be in your skill, your speciality in supply chain. Even to the point at my 13th year, they took us out of operations for a year to go to staff college. So a whole year was invested in you as a major before you were promoted to lieutenant colonel. And what that did was that, one, it gave me a hunger towards lifetime learning, which we can talk about in a while, but it also showed me that good organisations need to grow you, and that you can't just sit back within an organisation and be here, because you need to give people opportunity to keep growing. So we were regularly moved, we were regularly stretched, and I found that a really rewarding way to work and live. And so I try and do that in my organisation. So invest in our people, give them opportunities to grow, challenge them with roles that are outside of their comfort zone at times, and you get a much broader opportunity. And one of the X factors I look for when I'm selecting people to join our teams is that inquisitiveness, the desire for lifetime learning, not a status quo person, because people who sit in one role for too long and don't grow end up, I think, being blockers for the next generation coming through. So you've got to keep growing, keep moving, keep challenging people. And that goes to almost, in some organisations, in good talent management, you have conversations where you say to people, thanks for your contribution, you've been a wonderful member of the team, but we need your role because it's a growth role for someone else. You can move to another role over here, or you're going to have to move to another organisation to thrive. And some people find that quite challenging, but I think it's really important for the health of an organisation.
And I'll pick up on that one, because I think a lot is said these days about honest conversations you can have with people within organisations. You've always found that relatively straightforward, or something you've become comfortable with at time?
I don't think anybody finds it hard, finds it easy to sit down and say, mate, your time's up.
Yep.
But I have adopted... it's interesting when you talk about that. Australians are much more frank and direct than New Zealanders. One thing I had to do when and what I'd also say in the army, conversations are very robust. A lot of swearing, a lot of, and people don't mince words, and you're very direct. And I came to New Zealand with that style. It had served me very well within corporate Australia, but it went down like a cup of cold sick here. And so I've had to do a lot of work in evolving my style to be more attuned to New Zealand culturally. What I haven't lost is the frankness, and I've had those discussions in multiple forums, but I do honestly think you've got to sometimes say to people, sorry, we're going to have the conversation. And that's not easy for some people to hear, particularly in New Zealand, when we are largely silent disagreeers, we are passive aggressive, we are by nature conflict averse. New Zealanders find that sometimes a really difficult discussion.
There's two parts to that come out. So one, I think a lot of people watching this video have an interest in the development of strategy within an organisation. And there's a part where I think I'd find it interesting for you to talk about how you see strategy, the role of bringing others into, to developing that side of things. So perhaps we start with that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, strategy is a pretty simple thing. I think people overcomplicate it. You bring in McKinsey or you bring in Bain, and they write masses of analysis and things. And you should do the analysis. So I'm not saying that the strategy class is wrong or anything like that. But I do think in the end, it's a decision of a direction. And in the end, it's where to play, how we're going to play it, and what are we going to play with, right? What's the product we're going to launch into this market? Which markets are we going to do it? Are we going to go B2C, B2B? We're going to use a distributor or not? And for me, strategy is a decision that you've just got to sit down and make that, and then make a call. I also think strategy needs to be very simple. I've been a very strong believer in strategy on a page, being able to articulate strategy very simply in plain English, in order that the shop floor worker through to the executive all speak the same and understand it. I've been in organisations where the strategy is so theoretical and convoluted with management speak, you then go down to talk to a baker or a truck driver or a merchandiser in a store or an aircraft handler and say, do you understand how your role contributes to the business direction? And they go, no. And if you've got that disconnect, it's really challenging. So I try and just get a clear, articulated, very clear message that people can understand that. And then I tend to recruit people who are get stuff done people. There's a great interview which you might have seen on YouTube where Barack Obama says, you know, the one thing I realised when I was president is lots of people come and tell me what the problem is. I really just want to recruit people who can get stuff done, or as he said, get S done. And I'm a bit the same. Theorists and highfalutin ideas are great, but in the end, you've got to actually do stuff. And so I try and build teams with practical deliverers, but they've also got to share the passion for simplicity, they've got to share the passion and care about people. I'm not interested in people with big egos coming in who don't care about their people, or they see the worker as lower than them. So I run a very egalitarian type approach. You know, and small things you can do to demonstrate that are important. So I arrived at the Port of Auckland, and every one of the exec was sitting in a very large office with their own meeting table, with their own Zoom camera and screen, and no one went into each of those offices. Well, none of those offices exist anymore. I've had them all torn down, and I sit out on the floor along with everybody else. And people go, but what about confidentiality? And I go, well, I walk into that meeting room over there. So now, when a stevedore's wandering along through the building, they go, oh, hi, Roger, can I talk to you about something? And it's about building that simplicity. They feel they're part of it, and that there's fewer and fewer barriers. You will always still, though, intimidate people because of your positional power, and you've got to work really hard on that. The Army taught me that again. You know, I can be an officer and everything else, but I can't do the work without the soldier. I can be the greatest MD of a baking business, but I don't know how to bake a loaf of bread. And if the loaf of bread ain't a good loaf of bread, it ain't going to sell.
Yep.
And if it doesn't get put on the shelf by a merchandiser, it isn't going to sell. And so their roles are probably even more important than mine.
You've touched upon something I was going to ask as almost the second part to that question, and that is that well acknowledged saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you talked before about the way you perhaps needed to adjust your style coming from Australia to New Zealand. Are there lessons you've learnt along the way around perhaps, you know, differences in building a culture within a New Zealand business environment, perhaps compared to previous roles, or what you've learnt going from the various roles you've got in a New Zealand context?
I think the challenge for me coming to New Zealand was I had been used to having robust conversations where I got robust feedback. And so that would allow then, I would find getting to a direction or a strategy or a decision a lot easier because people weren't shy in giving you their views, whether they agreed or not, whether there was consensus or not. I came to New Zealand, I would share my view, and then I would be met with silence. And I went, okay, I found that quite unnerving, right? I thought of, and of course your immediate mindset is, you know, why are they not saying anything? And so I've had to learn to invite people to speak. So, Paul, what do you think about that? And once that invitation is given out, I get the feedback. So I've had to often now, rather than just having a decision, I often use a facilitator in strategic planning early on with a new team. And what they do is they give people permission to come out and speak out in a country where people are more reluctant to speak up. So that's probably the biggest change. It's in the approach to it of how we get people to participate. Because I've found the passive resistant, conflict adverse, silent disagreement aspect that's probably what I think is one of our greatest limitations if we're not careful. Yep. The other thing I think we can talk about this is I think our approach to the number 8 wire, and if it's not made in New Zealand, it's no good, and that we can modify everything, drives me insane about this country. We modify what OEMs produce in equipment because we know better, whereas the rest of the world quite happily work with the OEM's design. So I think New Zealand's got some wonderful strengths, but we've got some quirkiness which does challenge us a bit.
Yep. Moving on to a different topic, I hate to say it, but I've been stalking you on LinkedIn, and it was in your profile, and it's a really great focus. But to quote what is on your LinkedIn profile, so looking to find the right balance for a business between people, planet, and prosperity is fundamental to my approach to business. Now, I know a lot of businesses and a lot of leaders increasingly that has becoming their focus. What is your experience and what is your been approach for trying to bring together quite, let's say, perhaps areas that people see as being quite antagonistic to each other?
Yeah, and they do have a tension between them, right? I think when I joined Goodman Fielder at the time had been a great company. Started obviously in Motueka, and then built out and was a global company, $5 billion in sales, had operations globally, and Goodman Fielder was in its death spiral. It was declining. And Goodman Fielder really had a culture where they just cared about making a profit. And whilst I love the company and I spent 11 years there, what I found was a company that was fixated on prosperity of the shareholder. And we churned through people a lot. It was given lip service that you would get development. They didn't. So if you weren't self-motivated to do it yourself, it didn't happen. And we never discussed partnerships with the unions. We were quite antagonistic to the unions. We never discussed sustainable sourcing. Now, admittedly, we are looking back a decade ago or more, but what I saw was an organisation, and that organisation subsequently got taken over by Graham Hart. Hart then cut it up, and now Goodman Fielder is a completely different business and a shell of where it had been. And so I sort of reflected on that at the time and went, okay. And then I was lucky, as you said, to join Air New Zealand, where at Air New Zealand we were very focused on turning the business around and the profit. Because in the end, you run a business to make a profit. You have to make a profit, and what you also have to do is you get a decent return. If you're not making your whack, why would any investor keep investing back in you? So the prosperity piece is really important, because it also, if you are making money, you've got some money left over then to invest in the other things. And I saw it in New Zealand under Luxon's leadership, a real balance where he then said, we have to make more money, and we were very focused on that, and we went from 70 million up to, I think we peaked at 850 million profit. But we've also looked after our people. We had 12,000 people, so we had to build a partnership with our people. We had to develop our people, because as we talked about earlier, he like me sees the X factor is perpetual learning and curiosity. And as well, we had a role. We were the one of the largest dumpers of carbon into the atmosphere. We burned a lot of fuel, and we had to find a balance of how we could do that. So we had to invest in prosperity in the planet. And what I say to people is, if you've only got a single focus on making money, and you forget your people and you forget the impact you're going to do, eventually you're not going to have a good business. If you only worry about your people and you have a kumbaya culture and you don't make any money, well, you're going to go broke. Mm-hmm. And if you only worry about the environment, and I challenge a lot of environmentalists about this, is if you only fixate on that without acknowledging that there is a role to play in making money, and we still have to care about our people, it's not going to work either, and the business won't, by its nature, survive. The important piece for me that comes out of the people piece is not just about developing the IEAs, it's also about acknowledging building a partnership with the workforce and the collectivised workforce. And I have a very strong view on ER in this country, that we've taken an adversarial approach to unions for too long, and that's failed. And so I'm a very strong believer in building partnerships with the unions, bringing them into the decision-making process. And it's something we did at Air New Zealand with mixed effect. I think it was highly successful in the airport space where I was. I brought it to Lyttelton. I'm doing it now at Ports of Auckland. And, we're talking about hardcore blue-collar businesses, highly combative culture traditionally, with the unions who are extraordinarily militant. And they're finding it a bit challenging too to be invited in. I remember one senior union leader here said to me, Roger, you're asking me to participate at the beginning and coming up with a solution. Mate, I've worked at this place and in this sector for almost 50 years, and I've never been asked to do that, and I don't actually know if I can. You've got to give me some time to get used to this. I'm used to saying no and opposing management. Now you're asking me to be part of the decision making, part of the solution solving. And I do think that's a really important piece because, union members, collective, they don't like seeing the union and the management fight because it's like seeing mum and dad fight. You're loyal to both. And so if you can get and have a happy relationship, it goes well for the people.
A number of people talk these days around the primacy of the shareholder being diminished. I think just perhaps exploring what you talked about a little more, would you tend to agree with that it goes in ways that, let's say, a historical perspective of a decade, 2 decades ago, it was all about shareholder return, shareholder wealth. You would agree with that sort of sentiment as well?
I think that it is changing.
Yeah.
I mean, Milton Friedman certainly championed that message in the early 70s, and certainly that's what I grew up on. It's what I was taught at business school. There was no doubt that it was the primacy of shareholder return, and that's what we were largely focused on. Now, I did my MBA 25 years ago, so 23 years ago. So it was very of the day then, shareholder return, that's it.
Yep.
I do think that's changing. But what I think is as we move into people and planet, the shareholder actually gets a better return because ideally the company is more profitable, more prosperous, performs better, and therefore shareholder value is created by making it a better company. So I don't have a problem with this. What I would be challenged by would be an activist shareholder who came in with a single lens agenda, and as I said a bit about earlier about if you're just an environmental and you're only telling us we can't do that, you've got to find that balance and that tension. So, I think in the end there is a balance shifting now. As an example, we paid a company performance bonus to all of the staff at Port of Auckland. We've just changed our name, that's why I keep clicking back to Ports of Auckland. We're now paying the port, but we paid a company performance bonus of $1,125 to all collectivised workers. Now, in an organisation that only care about shareholders, would have taken that, I don't know, however much it was accrual, I think I remember, but I won't share it. We would have put that into dividend. And for me, it was the right thing to do to acknowledge these people for their contribution because we well outperformed our targets commercially and operationally. And it was off their hard work. So we're giving them a little bit of a thank you, acknowledging them, helping them meet next week's bills. Not only is the right thing to do, I think that'll get better discretionary effort next year or this year we're in now, which will get me a better shareholder return through a higher profit.
The final part of that is planet. And I think in New Zealand there's a stereotype of clean, green New Zealand. We do it better than anybody else. Do you have a view, given your international experiences as a CEO and your connections, that that's in fact right, or that we are in ways better than what perhaps other countries are doing in business, or where would you see that balance at the moment?
I think it was a wonderful piece of marketing spin.
Yep.
I think New Zealand's got a terrible record in some areas in regards to what we do with the planet, ranging from the condition of waterways right the way through. Now I think there's a lot of good work going on now to fix that.
Yep.
And certainly I know it was a very strong, I used to hear a lot of this discussion living in Canterbury with ECAN and everybody else. But what I'd say on the planet piece is I think the planet piece in New Zealand has been hijacked by climate change. Now this perhaps is a bit controversial to some people, and it's fixated on carbon. And what I keep saying to people is the planet's more, that's really important. We shouldn't, but it's an and, not an or discussion. And right now, I talk to sustainability teams, be it council or, are you a sustainability team or are you a carbon reduction team? And they go, oh, we're all about carbon. That's sustainability. And I think sustainability of planet is more than that. I think we've got a lot of work to do. As an example, we are whilst we're reforesting 35 hectares of land we own on the south head of the Manukau Harbour, which is a carbon thing, and it's also an ecological thing because we're going to produce a bridge to allow the bird life and the waitakaris to come across and start to spread again into the south of the harbour. But it's also about harbour health. We're investing hundreds of millions of dollars into harbour health initiatives where we need to get Meninga Kai back into the harbour. I think there is a wonderful program being run in collaboration between Ngāti Wheki, Littleton Port Company, ECAN, Christchurch City Council and Ngāi Tahu, called Whakaora, which is about the health of Littleton Harbour and the return of Meninga Kai. And that to me is as important as the work that Littleton's doing on reforesting the saddle above Littleton, which they've just been nominated for a Sustainable Business Award. So I think we've got to be careful in New Zealand that we see Planet as more than just solely carbon, and forget waterway health, harbour health. And the other thing about Planet is about your people. I mean, sustainability is also about making sure your people are in a good space, that they're safe, that they have enough money to feed their kids, that they aren't working double jobs, that they're not fatigued. So for me, it's a much broader thing.
Yep. Changing topic, I'm wanting to talk a little bit around the role of a modern CEO. And when I first met you, CEO of Littleton Port Company, now Port of Auckland. In both of those roles, I think it's fair to say you, by necessity, have a public profile, given public interest in both those assets, well, both what was here and also in Auckland. How do you balance the expectations of the CEO role in terms of one, that traditional, perhaps inward focus, but increasingly the need to front up and have some public profile?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's been probably the biggest change for me. Coming from Air New Zealand, where I was running a big function, I was very internally focused, very customer focused, because obviously our team were the core interface with the majority. The longest interaction that people have is normally a check-in, and with our check-in and ground stuff. So lots of people talk about the cabin crew, but if you're not got a wonderful experience at check-in, the whole world can turn to hell in a handbasket. So and in the lounge. So we were very customer focused and working on that. And I was very focused on delivering that as an operational performance, on-time performance and things. And I used to look at Christopher and Luxon and think, he doesn't spend much time in the business. He always seems to be out and about and engaging. And I sat down with him when I got the Littleton job and said, what's the biggest change you experienced becoming CEO? And he said to me, it's all about up and out. And I sort of went, really? And he goes, mate, you will spend an inordinate amount of time up and out, managing upwards to your shareholders, owners, to the board, and you'll spend a lot of external stuff. And what's come clear to me in the last couple of years, in the last almost 4 years now, is your executive run the business day in, day out. And if you've got a clear strategy and they know your intent, they get on with it. And they know where we're going. They know what our direction is. And they get on with running the business. And that's what I used to do in airports. I knew what Christopher's vision was. I knew what my boss wanted. And I got on and did it. What I didn't appreciate was the amount of external interest, the amount of media attention, the amount of interaction in both Littleton and here, be it either with CCHL here in Christchurch or directly with council in Auckland. You're spending a lot of time dealing externally. Probably both organisations had challenges when I first got into them that meant public profile had to go up steroids. Sadly, just before I started at Littleton, an employee had committed suicide. And her daughter ran a highly successful and quite just campaign in social media where she argued that her mother had been bullied to death. And this was gaining a lot of traction. And so as a result, And I'd certainly sensed when I got to Littleton it was a pretty tough place, renowned for being very challenging and militant workforce, and that the culture was pretty old-fashioned. And so I announced an independent review by Maria Dew into the allegations, then QC, now KC, into the culture and everything else at Littleton. And that obviously, and that was one, to address the accusations around the suicide, but also to address the challenges that I was picking up around culture. And so that was highly profile, if you remember, and obviously you hit the press and you're in the Christchurch Press talking about it and everything else. So that was here, and that necessitated really me working on my media skills. We'd done media training in other organisations, but this really was amped up. And I got a lot of support from being trained in that, and I also had an excellent GM of communications who supported me through that, Phil DeJew. And when I got to Auckland, well, Auckland was everybody had an opinion about Auckland, and we had the automation project, which the board made the decision to stop it. It's the right decision. Some will disagree. That's fine. But by gosh, wasn't there media attention on that decision? The decision to write off $65 million worth of software, and then subsequently the election of Mayor Brown and the whole discussion around the moving report. I've suddenly realised, wow, you've got to be out there, you've got to be selling a message. And the thing that has really come clear to me through that whole process is just be open, transparent and honest. Journalists are by nature inquisitive people. They will check up on everything you say. If they sniff that you're spinning, or they sniff that you're not telling them the truth, they'll hound you. And so we've run a really transparent case with that, and I now spend that, or engaging with industry bodies, or the board, is 60-70% of my time.
You touched upon a few moments ago about media training, and I think sometimes there's an inclination people have that, well, I can just be me, I don't need any help, I can just get on and do this. You think the support of training and development in that area is critical for these roles? Yeah,
critical. Yep. Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind, if you can get an opportunity to get media training, do it. If you get a role at this level that has any chance that you'll be engaging externally with the media, get trained. You've only got to look at politicians and everything else and understand. The thing about media training is two things. One, they teach you how to speak in a way that can be chopped and changed, and the 15 or the 8 or the 3-second grab, depending on what they want. You've got to understand. Media training also helps you understand what journalists are like and what they think like, which is really important. And lastly, for me, it also taught me that everything I say, no matter on the record or off, is reportable. Once you say it, it's out there. And that goes, therefore, to being extraordinarily considered in the way you're honest. Considered in what you say, because the grab can be cut one piece there, and suddenly you can look very different than what you're actually saying. So be very, just be considered in how you do it, and that flows then to social media,
which I was going to ask you about next. So you have more control over that channel.
Yeah, and I think it's really important as people are building their career is to be very measured in social media. Look, I was talking to a hiring manager, not in my organisation the other day, but in a different organisation, and she's looking for a role, and she had a candidate apply for the role, and she did what most people do, sit down and have a look what's on social media, and and there were things on that social media that put a question in their mind about, is this person the right fit for our organisation? Now. Is that right or wrong? It just is. It's what happens. People do it. And so I would argue to people to be quite careful with what you post, because once you put it out there, people are going to find it. And once it's out there, it's out there. I think LinkedIn is a wonderful tool. I'm a very strong supporter of LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a wonderful opportunity for you to put out your CV. It's also a wonderful tool for you to be able to engage with like-minded professionals and also to run a bit of brand building for yourself, because in the end, you're a marketable commodity, and you are going to be pitching yourself, and if you've got a good presence in social media, it's important. You know, I think it's Corn Ferry now won't take CVs from applicants. They say, we've got a strategic partnership with LinkedIn. We'll view your LinkedIn profile, thanks. So I really encourage all of everybody to have a really strong online presence and to have a really measured and clear and honest online presence.
One of the things that goes in on LinkedIn is, of course, education background. I remember meeting you for the first time as though it was yesterday. Littleton Port Company, we were walking down the steps on the way out, and you actually asked me about what my PhD research was on. But what we'd also talked about that day is...
Marketing.
Yeah, he's good memory. But it was one of those ones on that day, what really came across is a passion for always learning. So you don't stop at university age 22, 23. And I think I've got this right. One of the ones you stressed is actually if you were looking to make certain key appointments, has a person stayed engaged in education as they've gone through? Where does, for you, that value come from? And can you perhaps talk about the importance to you of lifelong education?
Yeah, the thing that's important to me is to have an inquisitive mind and to keep growing. And I think the important thing is, you know, whilst we're here talking about an MBA and you know, I've talked about the importance of that, is you know, as I said, I did my MBA 23 years ago. Now, before that, I'd done a master's in integrated logistics, and before that, I'd done 2 bachelor's degrees. Now, I could have stopped and gone, that's it. But the stuff I learned is 23 years old. Things have moved on. As I said, we only spoke about shareholder primacy when I was sitting there at Melbourne Business School. I didn't talk about sustainability, and I didn't talk about ER evolution and that sort of stuff. And so for me, I could have sat there, and I remember talking to a boss of mine a number of years ago. He said to me, Rog, the world's full of general managers who did their bachelor's degree and think they know everything and haven't continued improvement. He goes, they don't have the X factor then to take the next step. Because what they're not doing is they've not stayed current. And what I encourage people to do is to, if you're in the car driving along and you've got a long commute, buy a talking book and listen to, devour a book. Or if you love reading, you know, read a business book every month or every week. But the other important thing I do say to people is, it's important, from my perspective, to codify your learning. And the best way for me to do that is to set yourself challenges of attending another program. Now, it might be you do the micro-credentialing program that you know, I know you see starting to build. You know, I say to the people who say to me, Roger, I don't have the time to do a full-time MBA. And you go, okay, that's no problem. Why don't you do a micro-credentialing program?
Or executive education.
Or executive education, right? And so you might just, they're bite-sized, they're on a certain subject. You can go to different schools. Now, we are here at UC, so I don't want to advertise, but you know, you look at the plethora of executive education that's out there now. And just getting yourself in that mode of, oh, that's interesting. I might want to learn a bit about that. And I always think it's a great day when you go home and you say, I learned something new today. That's really, that excites me, and it's really cool. You know, I was lucky enough to win a New Zealand Prime Minister's Business Scholarship. Sadly, that program has been stopped by the current government. But what that gave New Zealand, if you were lucky enough to win that, was an opportunity to study internationally. And I had the privilege of doing the advanced management program at INSEAD in Fontainebleau, just out of Paris. And wow, you know, I thought, okay, I knew about Australia, I knew about New Zealand, I knew about Asia because I've been both had family live there and I'd lived in Asia. But then going to Fontainebleau, sitting there with people from the Middle East, Europeans, Japanese, Americans, my perspective grew, and that's why I would encourage everybody to keep challenging and keep growing yourself, because we can get very locked in our ways and very boxed and not challenged.
Yeah.
And so for me, an executive who continues to develop and grow is the sort of executive I want to have as part of our team.
Which I think is important for anyone watching this video. Is the advice would be, is there a point where I stop learning? No, just keep looking for opportunities.
Yeah, I'm looking right now. I did the AMP 5 years ago. How time flies. And what I'm asking myself, well, what's next? What's moved on? And I'm looking at opportunities. I was going through, just this morning, I was going through what does Wharton offer as a program. I've had a look at Harvard, and then I've also had a look at, what some of the other universities are offering around micro-credentialing. As an example, because I'm spending a lot more time working with directors right now, INSEAD has an international directors program, which gives you knowledge about directors. I've done the IOD course. So, what I try and do is I try and match the education I'm doing to the type of role I'm in. And I think throughout your career you can find opportunities for those educations that match where you are in your career.
I'm going to end on a question that asks you to look back. And it's really from this perspective of, and I guess this leads to, it does lead to this question. You've learnt a lot over in your corporate career. If you could get into a time machine, go back and see yourself 20 years ago, what are the key bits of advice you would give that would have perhaps made things simpler for you had you known them then?
Well, if you wind your clock back to probably December of 1997, when I finished up in the Army and went on to study, if I'd known East Timor was going to blow up and then the Australian Army was to go into 2 decades of warfighting, I probably wouldn't have left the Army. That's just one thing.
Yep.
Because I had trained for a profession that I had a deep passion for, it had a purpose, and I cared about it and I loved it. And so if I'd known that would have happened, we would never have met.
Yep.
And that would have been a sad thing, and I probably would never have come to New Zealand except to go skiing. Well, I don't really ski, but to Queenstown. Yep. From a personal perspective in the corporate world, I think the thing that I've had to learn is to be more humble, to be less aggressive, and to work with people and through people more. Early in my career, I was in a hurry. I was highly aggressive, and I talked about that earlier. And I was very driven, and it was get out of my way. And if you don't get out of my way, I roll over the top of you. And yes, I got ahead very quickly, but I left a lot of carnage behind me. And it was coming to New Zealand and learning to grow my blue side, my humbleness, and trying to be more calm and relaxed. If I could have done that earlier, I think I would have been a much more successful executive. One of the most impactful articles I've ever read is Jim Collins' Harvard Business Review article on Level 5 leadership. And I've only known one in my life. He was a general, doesn't matter who it was, in the Australian Army, but an amazing guy, and someone that I would still go and work for tomorrow if he asked me to do something for him. And I work hard now to being a level 5 leader, and I wish I'd read that article 20 years earlier and gone on that journey 20 years earlier.
I can say I'm very pleased you stayed on the trajectory you did, so we did get to meet. It has been an absolute honour getting to know you over the past few years, and I think one of the hopes out of this video clip today is I think there's a number of people that perhaps understand or think they know you through the various CEO roles that you've taken, but I think having this ability to talk about your experiences and those reflections about what shaped you to be who you are today, I think is going to be hugely beneficial for those watching this masterclass video. So Roger, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Paul. Take care.
Great, thank you.